Hi, my name is Katherine Ramdeen and I am running as an independent for Vancouver City Council in the upcoming 2018 municipal election. I'm not a politician and I'm not a millionaire. I'm just a person that lives in this beautiful city and thinks it can be run a little bit better. I think the council is lacking representation as far as it comes to people that actually live in this city and can't afford to pay their rent, can't afford to pay their mortgage. I think the fact that we don't have peer-to-peer ride sharing right now in 2018 in a huge city that has a huge tourist industry as well is quite appalling, and I think we need to do something about that. And I also think that there's a huge disconnect between the council and the mayor and the people that run this city and the people that live and work in it. I think that the people of Vancouver don't feel heard, and I think that's why they're not coming out to vote. So I think we need to change that. I think there needs to be huge changes when it comes to transparency and the disconnect with City Hall and its people. So maybe you can just look at the camera and say your name and who you are.
Tom Davidoff, Associate Professor, Sauder School of Business, University of British Columbia.
What is the housing market? If you could explain like I'm five, like the simplest exclamation that you can.
Well, it's not simple because
It's not?
there's many markets, because you've got cheap condos, you've got fancy houses. We think of a market as a single product in a single place at a single time with lots of buyers and sellers, but each house in a way is its own market. Homes in Vancouver, you might think homes in Vancouver are a single market, but again, you've got the luxury end, you've got the lower quality, older end, you've got luxury apartments, you've got beat up houses that are mostly being sold for land value because they're going to be redeveloped anyway.
Right.
But generally speaking, it's, roofs, overheads, somewhere close to Vancouver is the market we're thinking about.
So Canadians have a debt to disposable income ratio of 1.7 right now. This is several points higher than the US just prior to the 2008 financial mortgage securities meltdown. So what does this record level of debt mean to the housing market and to our economy in general?
Well, with low interest rates and high house values, it's attractive to borrow money to buy properties, and if your property value has risen, you can pull cash out. You can take a loan against the value of your house, not to buy it, but to spend the money. And that's attractive in a low interest rate environment because the money's cheap. You don't have to pay that much down the road. And because homes are expensive, you're either rich if you have a house and want to grab some of that cash, or you really need a lot of money to buy a house. So people are going to borrow more money in that environment, and that's what we're seeing. So that does put us at some risk, in the sense that if things change like they did in the US, where property values fall, which is what happened in the US, then a lot of them are going to owe more money than their house is worth, and that gets to be a real problem. If the economy's weak, they may owe payments on the loans that are more than they're able to make. If interest rates rise, holding the asset values constant, that payment burden could be a problem too. So it's certainly something you want to be aware of as a government. It's not a catastrophe now.
Why is it not a catastrophe now?
Well, interest rates are low and home values are high, so nobody's going to walk away from their property because they owe less money than their house is worth.
Interest rates set by the Bank of Canada. They've been at a record low for a really long time. Does that mean that a lot of people have been able to borrow a lot of money that maybe if interest rates were to go up, they probably shouldn't have borrowed that money?
Well, you have to be careful. So the Bank of Canada controls the shorter overnight rate.
What does that mean?
Well, okay, so you can borrow and lend money overnight.
Okay.
And the Bank of Canada is a big player in that market in Canada, and they can really set that interest rate. A 10-year loan, though, the Bank of Canada is not setting that rate. That's sort of based on where over the next 10 years is that overnight rate going to go. So if people think rates are going to grow from here, today's short-term interest rates might be low, but long-term interest rates might anticipate that increase and be longer because you're committing your money for 10 years. Right. Mortgage loans are keyed off of 5-year loans, so the Bank of Canada rate certainly impacts that, but people's view about where rates are going in the future, driven by inflation, how strong or weak will the economy be, also matters. We've had very low, remarkably low interest rates for a long time. You know, the U.S. 30 years, I don't know, 2-3%. When I was buying my first home, the realtor said if mortgage rates go below 7, that would be an important psychological barrier. I certainly remember double-digit interest rates. And so, yes, if somebody's borrowing money at 3% interest and they can only lock that rate for at most 5 years, typically in Canada, if rates went back up to where they've been in the past, 10-12%, that would be really catastrophic. Fortunately, the bond markets don't seem to think it's very likely because long-term rates aren't that much higher than short-term rates these days, indicating that people don't see, on average, people participating in the bond market don't think there's going to be a big jump.
What is a bond?
Rates. A bond is a promise to pay money down the road. So if I'm purchasing a bond, I'll give you cash and you'll promise to repay me over time. Some bonds are safe. People believe the Bank of Canada is going to do what they said. A mortgage is like a bond, a mortgage loan, because the borrower gets cash from the bank and promises them repayment over time. So the interest rate on that promise is going to look a lot like interest rates on available traded bonds like government or corporate bonds.
The median household income in Vancouver is around $73,000. How?
Yeah, depending on whether you're talking about a family or a household.
Household.
That's right. Yeah, household.
This is, it was listed as household.
That's right. Yep, that sounds right.
Okay, so if we're making this much money per household, how can we afford anything?
Well, the median earning household isn't purchasing the median house. Lots of people rent.
Yeah.
So it's the top.
Which they can't afford, or they're realizing that they can't afford either.
Yeah, rents are high relative to incomes, as they will be in a place like Vancouver. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
People love to live here. It's hard to build homes here because we have mountains and oceans, and we strictly regulate what people are allowed to build. So if you have a place that's great, and it's hard to build there, prices and rents are going to be high relative to incomes. People are going to accept not great incomes relative to prices because they get to enjoy the amenity. What would be weird is if you had the nicest place in Canada to live with
cheap.
the same price to income ratio as everywhere else. That would be kind of puzzling.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Does that mean that if you don't have a high enough income, you can't live in Vancouver?
No, you have to either have a lousy commute or rent a not great place or be lucky enough to have bought long ago and have your place paid for. But yeah, over time, it's hard to believe, unfortunately, and I think it's very unfortunate, but I think it's hard to believe that people with okay education and earning capacity are going to be able to live comfortably in beautiful cities around the world. There's just too many people and not enough beautiful cities. And unfortunately, environmentally and possibly geopolitically, the number of places that are beautiful, have clean air, and a good government that doesn't behave in an arbitrary and capricious way, that's a small number of cities. So you're going to have to be pretty well off to afford it.
But so this idea of debt to disposable income ratio of 1.7, so does that mean for every single dollar we make, we owe debt of $1.70?
Well, you want to be careful because there is a stock and a flow.
What does that mean?
Well, a stock is like a big chunk of thing that's just sitting there. A flow is a little, thing that flows every year.
Okay.
So the income is a flow. Every year you're getting the income, and the debt is a stock. So you owe to. It's not like every dollar you earn you have to pay $1.70 right now. It's like every dollar you earn, there's $1.70 of debt sitting around. If that number you quote is right.
It is. It was just released, and it just went up from 1.68. So, but how do we pay it off though if we're not making enough money?
Well, we are making enough money because the amount of money you owe on a loan is the interest rate times how much you owe.
If interest rates stay the same.
Right, but even if interest rates double, you'd be looking at 4% a year times 1.7 times annual income, which is a lot less than annual income.
Right.
Yeah, prices and rents are going to be set by how many people are looking to sell or rent out their place.
And since we're seeing
how many people and how much money is going into wanting to buy or rent
it's supply and demand.
Places. Absolutely.
Okay.
And the city absolutely can affect that.
How?
Because, well, the city controls zoning. So about 70% of the city is sort of single-family zoning. You're not allowed to build townhomes. You're not allowed to build row homes. You have to have a single house, maybe with a basement suite, maybe with a laneway. But RS zoning, which dominates the land that's zoned residential, doesn't allow towers, doesn't allow four-story walk-ups. Why? Well, it goes back a long ways. People want rich neighbors with trees next to them, right? I mean, what would you rather have, a rich couple or maybe 1, 2 kids with a big house and a beautiful set of trees? Or do you want a lot of noisy people who share your parking in an apartment? Now, some people like that urban lifestyle, but a lot of people would prefer trees to people next door to them. It's not unreasonable. And so, people talk about, well, we have to preserve the character of our neighborhood. We have to preserve the trees. This new type of housing that is being considered would be taking a chainsaw, somebody said, to our neighborhood quality. So if the city all of a sudden said it's open season, you can build 5, 6, 50-story buildings wherever you want, whenever you want, that would have a large impact because you'd be trying to dump a lot of apartments on the market all at once. In fact, we have built a lot of apartments, and it'll be very interesting to see if
that'll affect
given
the
changes
prices
that we've seen to the mortgage market, whether we're going to see prices and rents respond.
Well, yeah, according to like supply and demand, since we're building so much and there's going to be a lot more stuff on the market, wouldn't that mean that prices should, like theoretically? You have to
be a little careful because whether it'll be on the market or not isn't clear. They've all been pre-sold, all these units. The banks generally...
To who?
Well, whoever bought them. So that could be locals, it could be people from overseas. The industry suggests it's mostly locals. It could be investors who are trying to buy an apartment. Now, if it's an investor, they're going to look to rent the property out. So there may be rentals on the market which would push down rents, but not necessarily prices. They might be flippers, people who buy pre-sale contracts, hoping to sell them before the building's complete, who are not interested in being landlords, and then they're going to sell that unit before the markets. They could be end users. They could be people living at home with their parents in a rental apartment, and they're going to move in when the building is complete, and then the unit they're currently occupying, if it's not their parents' basement, that'll come on the market. So exactly what will happen when these buildings are finished to the supply of homes for sale isn't totally obvious, because we know very little about pre-sale buyers. It's not public data.
Why is it not public data?
Well, the government could change that. You can require registry in a pre-sale, but even then you'd have to do a census of pre-sale buyers to understand their motivation. Just because you have somebody's name and some characteristics about them, you might not learn much.
Right. That actually ties into the next good question. What do you think about the recent Supreme Court decisions against the Toronto Real Estate Board, forcing them to disclose historical sales and listing data, etc., to the general public? And how has this trillion-dollar market remained so opaque?
Well, there is data about property sales. It just takes a while to get there through...
Hard to get that information.
Well, you have to pay for it, but the type
How much do you have to pay for it?
I don't know. But like if you want to get all the transaction data for the last however many years you can get it, you just have to pay for it. Because for whatever reason, the government chooses to make it pay. However, the realtors have the data in real time, because once the sale is agreed upon, it takes time for the actual money to change hands and title to be transferred from one party to another. So the realtors have that data, and I think it's very useful that the public have the data. Now, some realtors will say, well, no, we need the privacy, because that's our value added, is we know things that the buyers don't.
Right.
I don't think that's true, because if you look at realtor earnings, the top realtors make a lot of money, and the bottom of the market of realtors, whether they're not working full time or they're not as skilled or they just don't have built up the network yet, they make a lot less money. So I think realtors, to earn money, must be doing something other than just sitting on listings. So I think the realtors, I think it's the best thing for the world, and I don't think it's the end of the world for realtors to make that data public. I think when people have more information, that's better. Yeah,
they can make more informed decisions usually.
I think so.
I talk to people that make minimum wage, and I talk to people that are making 6 figures, stuff like that. And everyone is feeling, I kind of feel like the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis, is somewhat of a philosophical crisis, because I feel like people are spending more money than they're making. And why do they want the things that they want? Why do they want to buy the condo in downtown Vancouver? What drives them to go and dig themselves into debt and take this 30-year mortgage and be a slave to their mortgage? Why?
Well, that's an interesting question. Look, a crisis is a child growing up in a developing country whose parents aren't there or have very limited resource, and that child sifts through garbage all day and doesn't get to go to school and is probably subject to physical and even sexual, abuse.
It is relative.
That's a crisis.
Yes.
I can't live in the neighborhood I want to because I haven't saved enough money is not a crisis. However, your neighbor who's a senior citizen living on a very low income, who's rented in a neighborhood all their life, is now widowed, really limited resources, can't pay the rent, barely, and the landlord is going to throw them out and make them look for a new place where they just don't have the ability, that is getting in the direction of crisis. Again, maybe not the scale of human tragedy of the children in the developing world, but it's a real problem for people. There's a range of crisis.
Yes.
There's doctors and lawyers who feel like, gosh, I went to med school, my wife went to law school, we ought to be able to have a great property here in Vancouver, but if we want a nice home, we have to live in the suburbs. Is that a crisis? I don't know. It's not great for the fabric of the community if people who are really successful feel like they can do better elsewhere. And then you get to people who try to be creative and think, geez, it's just too expensive to live here. It's very unpleasant. I have to accept living conditions that aren't okay. So, what's a crisis and what's not a crisis, I don't know. Do I think people are overly materialistic? No, you shouldn't get a latte. Don't get a latte. Make coffee at home. But then people say, I do my best, and am I allowed a little bit of a treat here and there? Probably we all ought to be living in tents, and as long as we can solve the sewage problem, we should be consuming way less. The idea that you judge people based on how much stuff that's destroying the environment they're wasting is absolutely appalling to me.
Or the way that people judge people because they're renting a place instead of they own a place.
But look, rent's expensive too.
Exactly.
The price of a home, if the market works, should equal how much over the long run people are going to pay in rent for it. So the desire to own, it's a very difficult.
You think Canadians are obsessed with having to own a house? Like we're real estate obsessed? That this is a thing we need to.
The obsession grows when there's uncertainty, because if people are in a lousy situation in Vancouver. If they buy today at very high prices, they're at risk of losing a lot of money if the market corrects. If they don't buy, because this is such a great place, over time they're at risk of being priced out. If you buy, you lock in. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So what do we do?
I think the correct answer is the government relaxes these zoning restrictions. But these bad zoning rules are both a threat or a weakness and a strength and an opportunity. Because by relaxing zoning, the city makes about a third of its money every year through what's called community amenity contributions. If a developer is allowed to build more than current zoning permits, generally not in the single family areas, but in some parts of the city, they have to pay the city 70 or 80% of what the value increase is to the land. So if you thought in the region over the next 20 years we could build 1 million housing units if we relax zoning, and each of those units costs $1 million more than they cost to build, that's 1 million times 1 million is $1 trillion. So you could build more homes that are more affordable. So instead of single family, you have townhomes and apartments, and by relaxing zoning, it's so profitable to the developer that the city says, no, for each of those units we want half or 3/4 of the benefit. You can make a fortune, a huge amount of money, and let the market solve the problem for people who can actually afford stuff. The used units get cheaper, which is great. Take the cash.
What do we do with that?
You write checks to people who are in need, right? Instead of having a lottery for 100 affordable rental units, you sell those as condos, you grab the cash, and all the thousands of people that were eligible to fight it out over those 100 units, you write them a somewhat smaller check, and you do that over and over again throughout the city.
But, okay, but what if the people, we kind of have dug ourselves into this debt problem. Do you think that, are people responsible enough if the city gave them money to just not just go create more debt?
The problem with poverty, they say, is poverty. You have to hope that if you write somebody a check to make them less poor, they're better off. Are they going to sell it on buy crack? Are they going to buy raspberry kombucha? Are they going to buy a Lex? I don't know what they're going to do. Hopefully
we can't control
people
that
as adults. Well, you can a little bit. You can say you have to spend it on housing, but then if you spend that money on housing, the money you would have spent on housing goes to something else.
So what do we do?
Well, again, I think there's people who don't have enough money given the prices. I think that's what a housing affordability problem is. Prices are too high relative to how much money people have.
But how much money people have, do you not think that it should be in our curriculum, that we should be teaching kids in high school what voting means, why we need to do it, how to balance a budget, how to understand how much income you make and how much you should spend and how you should not spend more than you make? This is something that, shouldn't we be teaching kids?
Possibly. I think if we teach kids to be really good at math and logic, they figure out the rest. I don't know how many mathematicians find themselves way over their heads in credit card debt. But I do think people have trouble with numbers. Some of it's just, some people have a hard time. But I think, of course the schools could do better. I think they should be better funded. I think there's a lot of work we could do on the schools. We're lucky. At UBC, I get just fantastic, mature intelligent, really act together students, and they're great. But the schools.
What about the people that just like don't have that great education? And
we need to expand education. We just need to do a better job. And that isn't to say teachers don't do a great job.
That isn't.
A lot of them do. And again, you talk about priorities. What's more important, that we have Lexuses and spend an hour and a half driving in traffic and creating pollution with the biggest car? Forget Lex, right? Around here, that's the loser mobile.
Yep.
The Lambo, what have you.
Ferrari.
That's a priority, and education isn't. Don't get me started.
Yeah.
I mean, look, capitalism's great. If you have the government bossing people around and telling them they can't make free choices, that's not great. But a consumer culture, it's disgusting on a lot of levels. It really is. I mean, the world's falling apart. We have the trash ocean. So
yes.
What do you do to make people have good values? Because if you do it at the point of a gun, that doesn't
really give real change, because it has to come from the person.
In charge of values, like the values police, we see that around the world. It doesn't work out.
It doesn't work out.
There are some very big problems with humanity, but we do the best we can with the system we have.